Picture the exact moment you finally get the thing you've wanted for years. The offer, the medal, the number in the account finally large enough to stop checking. But ask people who have actually lived that exact moment, and an unsettling number of them will tell you the same thing. It barely registered. Not because the achievement was too small. Because the moment was built, years in advance, to disappoint the very person chasing it. Sports psychologists have logged a version of this for decades. A lone figure standing on an empty podium after the arena has cleared out, metal still cold against the collarbone, the lights dimming one section at a time, and underneath all of it, an unexpected flatness sitting exactly where triumph was supposed to be waiting instead. Most explanations for it reach for exhaustion, months of adrenaline finally draining out of the body all at once. That explanation isn't wrong. It also isn't the real one, and the real one doesn't only apply to athletes. Most people, standing at the bottom of the staircase, assume the flatness they might feel at the top means one simple thing. They haven't climbed far enough yet. The promotion didn't feel like enough, so the next title must be the one that finally does. The number in the account didn't feel like enough, so the next number must be. Each time the climbing produces the same brief spike and the same quiet return to baseline, there's a familiar explanation waiting, not ambitious enough yet. It's also a remarkably convenient explanation for an economy that depends on people continuing to climb. It never once has to ask whether the staircase was going to lead anywhere at all. Picture someone getting the promotion they'd quietly wanted for 3 years. The email arrives on a Tuesday. There's a real jolt, genuine, unmanufactured joy, lasting most of the afternoon. By Thursday, the new title feels less like an arrival and more like a slightly heavier coat, worn into the same body, walking the same commute, checking the same phone for the same kind of validation it was checking for the week before. Nothing about the achievement was fake. The feeling it was supposed to deliver simply never showed up to stay. Researchers who study how people predict their own future emotions have found something that undercuts the whole premise behind that kind of chasing. Daniel Gilbert and Timothy Wilson, psychologists who spent years studying what they termed affective forecasting, discovered that people are reliably, almost comically bad at predicting how strongly, and for how long, they'll feel anything about a future event, good or bad. We consistently overestimate both the height of the high and how long it will last. Not occasionally. Consistently, across nearly every domain researchers have tested, from job offers to breakups to public honors. Part of what drives the error, they found, is something they called focalism, a tendency to focus so intensely on the anticipated event that everything else life will still be doing around it quietly disappears from the forecast. The imagined promotion arrives in a world where nothing else has changed. The real promotion arrives into an unchanged commute, an unchanged pile of laundry, an unchanged worry about a parent's health that was never going to resolve itself just because a new title showed up on the same Tuesday. Which means the problem was never that you hadn't achieved enough. It's that the part of your mind doing the forecasting, the part quietly promising you a specific, lasting feeling on the other side of the goal, was never a reliable narrator to begin with. You've felt this before, even if you never had a name for it. The strange gap between how certain you were something would change everything, and how ordinary you felt 48 hours later, doing the dishes, checking the same phone. Psychologists have a name for the particular shape this takes around big, defining goals. The arrival fallacy. The belief that reaching a major milestone will produce a permanent shift in how you feel, rather than a brief spike that fades back toward whatever your baseline already was. You don't arrive and stay changed. You arrive, feel something for a few days or weeks, and then quietly return to yourself. The self you were already fairly familiar with, still asking the same questions it was asking before any of this started. Success doesn't fail to satisfy because it wasn't big enough. It fails because satisfaction was never something an achievement could deliver on its own. But that still leaves an open question. If arrival never lasts, why do some achievements leave people flat while others, smaller, quieter ones, seem to leave something behind that actually stays? The psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan spent decades researching what actually predicts lasting well-being, and one of the clearer findings to come out of that research involves the type of goal being chased, not its size. Their colleague Tim Kaiser, studying what people name as their central life aspirations, found a consistent pattern. People whose top goals centered on wealth, fame, or image, what researchers call extrinsic aspirations, reported lower well-being overall, even after achieving them, than people whose central goals involve personal growth, relationships, or community, aspirations pursued for their own sake, rather than for what they'd prove to someone watching. Picture two people training for the same marathon. One is running toward a finish line. She can already picture herself crossing in front of people who doubted her. A photograph, a story to tell, proof finally delivered. The other is running toward nothing in particular except the version of herself who can run 26 miles, a private argument with her own body that no one else needs to witness. Crossed the same finish line on the same afternoon, and the research suggests these two women are likely to feel two entirely different things 3 months later. Not because one worked harder, because one goal was built to end the moment it was reached, and the other was never really about the finish line at all. The achievement itself, in other words, was rarely the real variable. What the achievement was quietly being asked to do, prove you're talented, prove you're worth loving, prove the doubters wrong, that was the variable. An achievement can succeed completely at the task you gave it out loud, and still fail at the task you were secretly asking it to perform, because that second task was never something an achievement could actually complete. There's a psychiatrist who understood this from the opposite direction, not by studying success, but by studying its absence in people who seemed, by every outward measure, to have everything. Viktor Frankl, writing after surviving the concentration camps of the Second World War, described a specific kind of suffering he called noogenic neurosis, distress that comes not from trauma or deprivation, but from an absence of meaning. He noticed it most often, he wrote, in people who had achieved exactly what they set out to achieve and found an unexpected emptiness waiting on the other side of it. He called that emptiness the existential vacuum, and he considered it one of the defining conditions of modern life, not a malfunction, but a symptom of chasing accomplishment as a substitute for a reason. Frankl had noticed something related years earlier, under far harsher conditions. Among prisoners in the camps, he observed that survival correlated less with physical strength than with whether a person still had something outside themselves worth living for, a person waiting, a piece of work unfinished. Meaning, in his account, was never something an achievement produced as a byproduct. It came from something closer to and outside the self, a relationship, a piece of work someone actually cared about, a value worth suffering for. Success could sit right next to meaning. It could never manufacture it. None of this is only about careers, or medals, or money. The same disappointment shows up at every finish line modern life sets up as the one that will finally feel different. The wedding was supposed to feel different. The graduation was supposed to feel different. The number on the scale, once it was finally reached, was supposed to feel different. Each one delivers something real, briefly, genuinely, and then hands the self back exactly as it was, standing in a doorway that was supposed to open onto something else entirely, finding only another hallway on the other side, identical to the one just left. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote about the self not as something you already are, fixed and waiting to be revealed by circumstance, but as something you're continually in the process of becoming, a task, not a possession. If he's right, the entire premise underneath the arrival fallacy collapses on its own terms. You cannot arrive at a self through an outcome, because the self was never the kind of thing that finishes. It was always the process. The achievement was only ever the vehicle. So here's the uncomfortable part. If you've ever hit a goal you worked years toward and felt, underneath the congratulations, a strange and almost embarrassing nothing, the problem probably wasn't the goal. It was what the goal had quietly been recruited to prove. Ask yourself, honestly, what question you're hoping your next achievement will finally answer. Whether you're actually talented or whether you got lucky. Whether you're actually lovable or just useful. Whether the people who doubted you were right, all along, underneath everything. None of those are questions an achievement can answer, no matter how large it gets. They're not achievement-shaped questions. They're identity-shaped ones, and identity tends not to respond to evidence the way it responds to relationship, contribution, and time. You can win the case, get the call back, hit the number, and still lie awake running the same argument you were running before any of it happened, just with better material to argue against yourself with. Which is why the exhaustion explanation, the one most commonly offered for that flat feeling after the biggest win of a career, was never wrong so much as incomplete. The come-down wasn't only the body finally running out of adrenaline. It was a goal finishing on schedule, having been asked, quietly and unfairly, to deliver something no goal was ever built to deliver. Proof, once and for all, that the person chasing it was enough. Which leaves a stranger question underneath the one this began with. Not what you still need to achieve, but what question you've been quietly asking your achievements to answer for you all along. Was it ever something an achievement could actually answer?